did the Nephilim survive the flood? And we read in Genesis 6, when he describes the Nephilim, that they were around at this time and after being after the flood. And so from this we can assume that there were Nephilim both before the flood and after the flood, which then raises the question, well, how? How did the Nephilim survive the flood? One interpretation is that someone in Noah's family that was on the ark, or maybe some of the wives that were taken, had Nephilim DNA in them. And so when they, after the flood, went on and kind of filled the world again, the Nephilim continued through that way. The issue with this is that kind of one of the whole reasons for the flood was to wipe out the Nephilim. Like the Nephilim appearance, suddenly God's talking about a flood. And I think it's because the Nephilim embody just how wicked and corrupt the world and creation had become. And Noah specifically is identified as being one that's righteous, blameless among the people of the time. And so we're meant to assume from this that he is pure of any kind of Nephilim kind of DNA. It would make no sense if God chose this family and purged the rest of the world, but kept this family to continue if some of them were contaminated with Nephilim DNA. So I'm not convinced by this theory. Another theory is the stowaway theory, the idea that a Nephilim just very simply stowed away in the ark and that's how they survived. Maybe this idea is purely speculative. We don't get anything like this in the Bible or in other kind of writings around this time. And so it would just be a guess. Some suggest that the flood was local and not global, and therefore there were Nephilim outside of the flood that were unaffected. There'll be some Christians that hear that and immediately go, you can't say the flood was local. It was the whole earth was flooded. I don't have an issue with saying that the flood was local, but if we're going local to a particular area, but if we're going to say that, I think the understanding was still that it was the known earth was flooded, that all of the parts of the earth that humanity at this point had explored, and they'd not travelled that far, all of that area had been flooded. And so I don't think there's really much room for Nephilim outside of that area because it was the known earth that was flooded. That would be my understanding. So another theory is that the reason that there are Nephilim after the flood is because sons of God, spiritual beings, continued to make Nephilim after the flood. My issue with this is then the theological kind of consequences and impact of this, which is that if that hadn't stopped after the flood, we don't see anywhere else in the Bible that suggests that had stopped. And so that would suggest that it's still happening today, that there are spiritual beings creating Nephilim today. And I just don't see any of that anywhere in the Bible. I don't see any threat of that. I don't see any warnings of that. As we'll see as we work through the Bible in a year, as we get to passages like Joshua and Judges and then eventually David with Goliath, I think we see a very intentional move on the Israelites' part to wipe out the Nephilim. That as they embody spiritual rebellion, it's their responsibility to wipe out all the Nephilim. And I believe by the time we get to King David wiping out Goliath, who was the descendant of the Nephilim, and his brothers, I think that's when it was successfully achieved. That wouldn't make any sense if there was still Nephilim kind of knocking around. So I'm not convinced by that interpretation, which then leads to the exact last theory that I've got, which was a theory that one of my scholars at Bible college kind of suggested and was in favour of, is that there aren't any Nephilim after the flood, and that any mention to the Nephilim were mistaken or they were lies. So, for example, in Numbers, we get the spies going into Canaan to spy out, and they come back and they go, we can't fight them because they are like Nephilim. They are giant people. We can't do it. And the argument being that they misunderstood or that they actively lied to try and persuade everyone else, you don't want to go in there, it's not worth it. Again, I don't like this theory because there's nothing in those passages that suggests that those speaking misunderstood or lied. And also, as we get through the Old Testament, I think there's a real conscious effort from the Israelites to wipe out the Nephilim. That doesn't make any sense if there aren't any Nephilim. So I've given you about 5 or 6 different theories there that I don't agree with. And so, in short, my answer is I don't know. We don't know. The Bible doesn't say. I think all that we do know is that there were Nephilim before the flood, and there are Nephilim after the flood. We don't really know how they survived. You may disagree. You may have found one of those interpretations that I've just gone through helpful and explain it for you. So if you have, that's great. But that's where I land on that one. I hope you found that helpful. Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments below. This was a snippet of a much larger conversation, which you can find here, or you can get plugged in with our Bible in a Year commentary just there. Otherwise, I hope to see you in the next video.